Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This is John Kogan. I'm CEO of Proformative, the online community for corporate finance and related professionals. First, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Expanding Your Network. There is nothing more important to successful career management than effective networking. And the more senior you are, the more that is true. You have a great pitch and know how to run a networking meeting. Now, how do you find people with whom to network? How do you identify and bring people into your network that will be the most valuable to you in your career? This webinar will cover the following pillars of success in building the network you need. How to be memorable, networking, building your network with those with vested interest in your success, moving your networking online, and building off of your networking meetings. We've got a wonderful speaker with us today, Mark Richards, who I will introduce shortly, and I think we have a lot of great information for you to take away from today's webinar, so I'm really looking forward to this. I hope you are as well. A quick note, many of our events are sponsored. This series is sponsored actually by us because we always want to give back to our community, and we thought that the career series, which is actually 18 webinars during this year, would be a great way for people to get back to some of the touch points that will help them excel in networking and career development and help them get where they want to go. So this morning, it's courtesy of Proformative. A quick note about Proformative. We are the largest and fastest growing online resource for senior finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. We are a community of more than 600,000 people at this point, all finance, accounting, treasury, and related. So CFOs, controllers, treasurers, finance professionals of every stripe. What we do is we share knowledge on Proformative. It's very simple. If you have a question, you can find an answer on Proformative. Chances are, even if you haven't done something before, the tens of thousands of people within each functional area that we've got on Proformative, probably a good chance that many of them have done it before. So it's a great resource. And it's, of course, completely free, like everything on Proformative, and noise-free. So no ads, no self-promotion, nothing, just peers helping peers. It's a wonderful thing. So please feel free to check us out at Proformative.com if you haven't in the past. A couple of notes on today's event before we get going. A link to today's presentation and a video of this webinar will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours of the event. This deck is actually already posted on Proformative.com/resources. It's probably the top item posted since we just put it up there this morning. And you can go grab it at any time. Please feel free to do that, share it out, or keep it for reference. Those who would like CPE credits will need to answer the 2 polling questions that we'll put up during today's event. We'll give about 45 seconds for each polling question, plenty of time. They're very simple and straightforward. If you have any questions about CPE credits, please contact Tanya Walsh. You can see her email address right there. Most of you, if you want CPE credits, probably check the little box when you register for this event. If you didn't, though, definitely reach out to Tanya and make sure she's got you covered there. Please ask questions. We want today's event to be interactive, and the last 15 minutes of the event, well, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how we do on timing, will be devoted to answering questions from the audience. So if you take a moment to glance at your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a little section there called Questions. Please ask questions at any time today. We'll probably hold most questions, unless they're clarifying questions, until we get to the Q&A at the end. But by all means, ask your questions, and Mark will answer. And finally, when you step off the survey, either when you leave or when we shut the webinar down at the very end, you'll be presented with a survey. It is 60 seconds. We greatly appreciate your taking that minute to help us out because we'd like to know what we can do better the next time. Also, we make it very easy during that survey for you to request a connection with Mark. So if you request that connection, we'll connect you guys via email, and it's very quick and easy. So if you want to be connected with Mark, that is the way to do it. We will be happy to help you out there. We've got a lot that we want to cover today, but long story short, we want to help you effectively recruit the folks you want to be in your network and then leverage those people to your best advantage. and you'll be hearing all about that today from the gentleman I'm going to introduce right now, Mark Richards, who is a longtime finance executive and also the creator of Candidates Chair. Mark is currently helping SuccessFactors integrate a company they recently purchased in Minnesota, where Mark was the consulting CFO. Mark started off in public accounting 25 years ago and has been in corporate finance roles for the past 20 years. His roles have included being CFO of 6 startup companies, and SVP for Royal Bank of Canada in their U.S. Wealth Management Division, and a Director of International Finance for Carlson Companies. Mark developed CandidatesChair.com after a job transition and has been chair of a local finance executive networking group in Minnesota for 5 years. His site, Candidates Chair, has drawn visitors from over 90 countries, and over 25,000 copies of his job search tools have been downloaded from that site. Mark also has 2 of the most read blog posts on Proformative in the last year. So with that, Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it away.
Thank you, John. Thanks for Proformative for hosting, and welcome everybody. And as John said, this is our job search series, and it's the 3rd one that we've done so far. So it's so far I think we've had some nice feedback from everybody. And the one thing I would like to emphasize at the beginning is that I will never say that I'm an expert in the field, but an expert of being in the field. And everything that you're going to see here today and that I'll share is just from my experiences that I've had when I went through my own search or just my ongoing networking. But also, more importantly, I think, is all the feedback and insight that I've gotten from my fellow finance executives in particular that I've gotten over time. So I've probably met with, oh gosh, a couple hundred finance executives. So this is, when I put together this series, it's really the greatest hits of everything that I've learned over time. Okay. So like I said, this third webinar in the series, and I would say that this one actually applies to everyone, regardless whether they're in transition or not. And the first 2 series covered just job search basics, and that basics were the key things that you need to know before you start your search to get really effective. And then the second webinar was getting yourself just ready for networking, what to do before, during, and after. And so today is you're at the point where you understand how to go out and network, and now how do you expand it? And so what we'll go through is talking about how big you want your network to be and how being memorable comes from knowing where value is created in networking and why being memorable is important when it comes to expanding your network. The methods that you can expand your network, first, how you can gain exposure versus connections and how you can turn that exposure into connections. And then because we're on Proformative today, and I think for finance executives, personally, for me, it's just been a very unique site, and that how I fit that into my networking equation and how I think it can help you as well. And then lastly, how to just keep your network rolling once you get it built up. So the first question in networking for me is you have to decide how big do you want your network. And really time is your governing factor here when it comes to your network, because I look at there's 3 groups of people that you really are working with. First are people that I call have a vested interest in you, and I'll go into that more detail, but those are the people that know you very well. And so quite frankly, you don't have to spend a lot of time with them. And then former colleagues, again, you know them, they know you, so you don't really have to spend a lot of time networking. But then once you move past that, and the further you move into your network, it just takes more and more time. And the time really is finding those people, getting connected to them, and then preparation for the networking with them. And also as you go further and start to grow your network, that I believe in my mind that it's probably equal amount of time to build your network as it is to maintain. And quite frankly, the bigger it gets, the more you spend more time on maintaining than you do building, just because you got to take the long view of networking, and that it's not just to build a network to accomplish a single goal, but to build a network that you can go back to time and time again. And so to me, the real key for yourself is trying to figure out, how big of a network can you maintain, because I think of it, the best network is one that's effective, and that's where, when I mean effective, it's you can reach out to somebody and they'll be willing to assist you, and vice versa, because you know them well enough to offer connections to one another. So, for each person, the size of the network you'll build is different. But I think the key factor is making sure that the network that you build is effective for you. So to start being effective, to me, I always think about being memorable, and I think to me, it's the real hidden key of building an effective network. And if I ask myself, why would you want to be memorable, it's because you really are competing with multiple priorities for your networking contact. Besides work and family, et cetera, people generally have, just a few hours each during a week, each night a week to do activities, and whether that is with their family or networking, and that's when most of the follow-up takes place. And it's important to remember that most of the activity in your networking doesn't happen at the time when you meet with someone, but it happens over time. And so the real key about being memorable is understanding kind of where the value comes in the networking meeting, which we'll cover next. But it's the ability to start a long-term relationship in that first meeting, because it's really that first meeting that gets you out of the gate and you build from. And if you have gone back, or even if you have someone in your network that maybe you need to reconnect with, it's kind of the same effect. So if there's people out there that you have met in time, this might, taking the approach of how do you go back to them to rekindle that network would be the way to go at it as well. So let's talk about the value of where it comes from. And that this is a repeat slide from my last presentation, but I think it's pretty important. And this is what I call my non-scientific representation from literally hundreds of networking meetings. And I think at first glance, where the value created, it comes off in many ways a little bit opposite of what I think people would expect, and that the middle column of during the meeting is much lower than you think. But it really starts, it's much like, networking, is like any sport, then it's the practice before and the analysis after that make you effective during the game. And in the before column, the real value for you, and we'll get, again, into this a little bit more in the next upcoming slides, is selecting the right people to network with is probably the most important step you can do to get your network going. And then the research that you do, both in terms of what you're looking for yourself, but in them, the commitment in that. Another item that I like to emphasize is, what are you seeking from that individual that you're networking with? Are you seeking for them to help you develop your business, to help you find a job, to just help your own personal growth? Understanding what the commitment is that you want from that person really will drive how effective you are as you get into networking with them. During the meeting, after when I said the last one is your meeting prep, obviously getting ready for each meeting and treating each meeting differently, and not assuming one is like the prior. Because when you get to the meeting, at that point, quite frankly, not a lot will happen other than it gives you that chance to kind of impress somebody. But this is where you will come in and be able to offer connections with someone, which shows that you're there for mutual networking, and that you are able to deliver a simple message to them about kind of what you're seeking in a networking relationship. And then also this is where you really take all the notes and do all the work afterwards. And it's after that meeting where it's your actions that you're following up on the commitments they've made, and then the ongoing connection with them. That's where the real value happens, in my opinion. That because chances of them knowing, let's just say you're looking for work, the chances of someone knowing about a potential role for you at the moment you meet with them is generally pretty small. But if you maintain that relationship over time, that's when you'll get feedback. I can just give you a perfect example of this. There's someone I've known for several years that I met through networking, and on Monday of this week, he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I was talking to somebody and they're looking for a new CFO. Are you interested?" And so this is just an individual that I've met, again, like 5 years ago, and we've just kept in contact over time, and shared networking contacts or ideas with one another. And that's where it's after you meet someone, that's when you're really going to find all the value in the relationship. So the key message here is on this slide to me, and why I wanted to bring it back in, was that it's the work before and after that really helps you build and maintain that network. So let's start with selecting who you want to meet. And I really put it into 3 big buckets here: business development, search, and personal growth. And I know that most folks on the line today obviously are in finance, but I still think that, quite frankly, finance here can help businesses grow as much as anybody else. And I also believe that everybody is out to sell in a company, or needs to sell in a company. And I mean, you can look at the bullet points here. We don't have to go through them one by one, but as you go through this, this is really research about yourself, and the better you define what you want, the better your ultimate results you'll have. Because when you sit down with someone, they can tell within the first 5 minutes whether or not you really know what you want. I'm sure everybody here has been on the other side of a networking meeting where someone's come to meet with you, and it's been hard for them to articulate what they're looking for, etc. And so it's hard for you to know how to help them. So again, as you want to build your network, figure out where does that person fit in terms of what you're looking to fill in your network. Again, is it to help develop you, find a job, or figure out how to, give yourself some personal growth. And I think once you figure this out, understanding the type of people you want to meet actually comes pretty simple, because you just start thinking about where would I find that type of person that I need to meet based on what I'm looking for. And again, for finance, this is a great, I think Proformative is a great spot, where you can start to find people. As John mentioned earlier, we've got tens of thousands of people on here. So, I mean, from a personal growth standpoint, it's amazing. But even for a search, I've reached out to people on Proformative, and because I was looking at a new industry and I didn't know anything about it, so found someone who answered a question, reached out to him, and we had a dialogue after the fact, after I reached out, just because I was trying to understand a particular aspect about an industry that I hadn't seen much before. So I think from helping you figure out what you're looking for and where you might find those people, or in actually finding the people you want, you could do that on Proformative. So take advantage of that, especially since it's free. And so now I'll turn it over to John for a quick polling question. So take it away, John.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so for those of you here for CPE credit, please do take this polling question. We just popped it up on the screen. Frankly, even if you're not here for CPE credit, let us know what your experience has been. We will share the results of this. It's all anonymized, of course, but we'll share the results of this when we get into the Q&A session. It's always interesting to see where people have found success, people who are peers have found success when they're looking for their next job. I'll also remind folks to please ask questions as we go, if you have any questions for Mark, and then we will get to those during the Q&A session, which will come towards the end of this webinar. So I'll go ahead and keep this poll open for another few seconds, so go ahead and get your vote in if you haven't yet. And I'm going to go ahead and close it down now. And Mark, we're going to hand it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, John. When I mentioned earlier, there was really different types of people in your network, and the cornerstone for building your network are people that have a vested interest in you, and I have them at the top of the chart here, and the way I categorize them is that those are people that are willing to stake their reputation on you, and these are people that know you very well enough that they cover what my opinion is all the 4 areas, and they can offer you personal advice. They'll vouch for you for anyone. They'll actually pitch you besides offering connections. And then as you move down and kind of move into the network, your former colleagues, obviously they've worked with you, so they can share your experience, so they can vouch for you. If somebody calls and asks about your background, they can explain it to you in the performance that you did. Besides, if you know them well enough, they've been willing to pitch for you and offer connections. And once you break out of those 2 levels, you begin to work with people in the same industry and profession, and they obviously can understand your skills because it's similar, whether it's from, whether in retail together or you're just one finance person to another. And then lastly, where your new connections that are probably, maybe not outside your industry or perhaps maybe less of a direct line to what you're doing today, they generally can be willing to make connections. And so obviously you can see that as you go further and further along, it's harder to get the same scope of service immediately from someone. And in fact, you'll notice on here that I've grayed out the circles for the same industry profession and new connections, and because again, you have an existing relationship with the people that have a vested interest in your former colleagues, and the next two levels, you have to establish that relationship, and that goes back to, again, selecting the right people, understanding how to approach a networking meeting. And for those of you that if you didn't attend the last webinar, I would encourage you to go back and look at the deck or watch the webinar from the last series, just because it gives a lot of great information about how to approach networking and the effectiveness of how to make a networking meeting really work for you. And I think here that for me, this is where, as you move into your networking, understanding what you can get from somebody is important, because then you'll know kind of what to ask them. So obviously for someone that you just meet, if you're asking them to pitch you to somebody, it's less likely that they're going to do that, just because they just don't, they just may not know that for you. So again, understanding what someone can provide to you is probably just as important as, why you wanted to connect to them in the first place. So if we, the key, though, of building your relationship in time is, again, when I talk about the long term is, even though you've just met this person, you can expand their capability for you as you build that relationship. So perfect example is the guy that sent me that CFO job. I mean, he was in the lower, he was just a new connection for me. And so when I first met him, because I think he's about 6th or 7th person in the chain from where I started, from a former colleague that had started the chain. But over time, he and I have just kept connected, and so what I've done is really moved him a little bit more to, obviously, that arrow to the left, and so he became someone that would be willing to offer connections. But as we got going, now we've worked enough together that, quite frankly, he's been willing to vouch for me. And so, which has been, again, it takes time to get there, but just because when you start there and then someone that's a new connection doesn't mean you can't expand it. And even with your former colleagues, your ability to, educate them or show them what you've done since you've worked with them, that can effectively, if you would, increase their ability to pitch you and offer connections with you. So I think it's a really, I think once you get started with somebody, that continual connection with them is what allows you to, build that relationship and get more out of that network in time. Oops, I think I just went too many. Sorry. So let's talk about where you can go to build your network. And obviously the big place today is online. And so what I've done here is put together, it's, I guess, my world of networking techniques. And the blue is your offline, and the red is your online. And so let's start in the upper right-hand corner. Or sorry, I should say, my chart when I did this, I looked at how I put these on the chart was I looked at first the kind of two ways. The first was just each item's raw potential based on, what kind of exposure you might get for something or how many connections you could potentially get. But then second, I also looked at how much something would contribute to your reputation or brand. So if you look at the far upper right-hand corner, quite frankly, what gets your exposure going is as you build that reputation and as you get out there, it's amazing to me how it starts to open doors for you that you never knew even existed. And so when you look at an opportunity, think of it both, not just on those two scales, but also think about what it does for your own personal reputation as someone who is a good networker, or your reputation based that, in terms of you've shown that you can do the job, or you've got the right skill set. So, what gives you that opportunity to build that reputation? So that's one of those important factors I looked at these two scales. When I look at, let's just take the upper left here, which is in the circle, which is circled, that in an offline world, I think the three areas that I think really offer great potential for connection are, volunteer boards, alumni boards, just board, any like if you're on a board of a company, et cetera. And the reason that is because these are opportunities where you really can build a really close relationship and a regular relationship with people. You've got kind of a starting point, a common interest that you're building from, and it really can accelerate that network as you get going. I think that when you look at that's where I think from an offline world, if you're going to start networking, is a great place to go. I think if you look at the online world, obviously the immediate thought everybody has is LinkedIn, but I separate LinkedIn. You can almost see it's on two parallel ends of in the red is there's LinkedIn, which I think is your active networking connections, and this kind of plays to my message on the right that the number of connections that you have is interesting. When you and your network connection can help one another, that's when it becomes a real relevant connection. So I think if you have a whole bunch of people in your LinkedIn that are inactive, they're potential, but at the moment I always just kind of consider them basically inert. They're not really doing anything for you at the moment. And you can see where I place Proformative on here, and again, it's not by its traditional sense a networking site like LinkedIn, but I think what you'll find here, and I'm going to go to a slide next that talks about how it can help you in that. And again, I emphasize Proformative here just because most of us on this call are finance executives. And again, you can look at the other components on here afterwards, but I think that the key for online is once you online basically build your exposure, but ultimately what you need to do here is find a way to take that online exposure to an offline, to whether it goes through an email exchange or to or find a way to get on a call with someone, or if they're in the same city, get to meet with them. Because again, that's the to me it's that one-on-one connection that ultimately will build the relationship. I think that well, John and I are a perfect example. John and I met, we connected initially via Twitter is how we got connected to one another. And then after that we had a phone call, and then we had another phone call, and then that's kind of how my relationship with Proformative built. Was we basically took an online connection into an offline discussion and networking opportunity. So specific to Proformative, I call it your networking elixir. And this is my experience, but also the experience of many other finance colleagues here on Proformative, that Proformative offers you, I think, a really unique blend of being able to make connections with people that are on the site, but also for exposure, because it obviously it has a huge U.S. presence, but also now a growing international presence. So your ability to build your reputation is a great spot. So if you take the blogs, many of the blogs have as many as 5,000 reads, and you really get the chance to show what you know of people, and then you get to interact with folks that you respond. So again, some of the blog posts that I've had that people have replied to, I'll reach out to them and we'll have an offline conversation afterwards. And so again, taking the online to offline. Answering other people's questions is another way that I've had people reach back out to me after I've answered something. And again, it builds that reputation as you provide good feedback and input to other people. You could become an expert and be recognized and you're recognized as one when you answer a question. And I can tell you right now that if you want to develop instant credibility with somebody, you send them a link to one of your posts where you're listed as the expert. Whether you're looking for a job or looking to network with somebody and you want to share something that you've written or done or an interesting idea, it's pretty often I'll get a comment back like, wow, nothing like getting something from an expert or something. So it really gives you something. And then, lastly, there's this year the big CFO Dimension event, and this just gives you a chance to meet face-to-face with fellow finance executives, to learn, share. And again, when you think about after you move past your vested connections and your former colleagues, your next best spot in building your network are people in the same industry profession, and so that's what this event will do. And so, I mean, I'll just stop for a second and ask John, is there anything else you want to add to this, John, this slide here?
Actually, that's a wonderful synopsis of ways that folks can reach out. And it is interesting to see how many people are contributing, and then I hear just constantly from folks just like you, and I'm in touch with a lot of our users as to just how useful it's been. I mean, we don't have the built-in sort of continuous connection feature that LinkedIn has, and they do that great, and we don't want to do that because it's wonderful what they've done on LinkedIn. But we do have an entirely functionally focused group of folks, and if you want to get in front of that group in a place where folks are trying to learn, and that's what Performative is all about. We're a great place to build your reputation and, of course, to learn, and there are a lot of connection points that can be made on Performative, and in fact, you can reach people one-on-one in Performative. So, Mark, I think this was great, and thanks for talking about it.
No problem. All right, so let's talk a little bit as you go online and the networking guidelines I have offered to folks about when you want to start networking online. And again, I think it begins with you start with your purpose and your desired outcome. What are you seeking that person to do for you? And also answer the question, why would they be interested in connecting with you? So what can you provide them as well? So because, again, if you're trying to build a mutual relationship, try to have an idea. And you may not know that always when you start, but that's one of the things that you'll need to try and figure out because, again, to build that relationship, it has to be one that has a mutual benefit. And those are the best relationships and the best connections. The next, treat treat the online networking like your offline network. One of the cautions and the risks within, especially like LinkedIn, it's really easy to connect and refer, but you really need to use the same caution. If someone comes to you on LinkedIn, you've connected with them, and they say, hey, can you connect me with these people? I mean, you want to make sure whenever you make that link to somebody in your network that, again, you've kind of pre-screened that there's some mutual benefit. I mean, it only takes a few clunkers to your network for someone to come back and tell you, stop it. And honestly, it's that there is a risk, again, and that's where if there's any risk in LinkedIn about having a bunch of connections that you haven't done anything with. When they come to ask you for something, you really have to figure out, are they somebody I know well enough that I want to connect them to somebody, especially somebody that has, there's an important person in your own network, someone whether it's a vested interest or a former colleague. I think it's activity beyond your connections, your posts, tweets, blogs, et cetera, really support your reputation, back to what we said about Performative, but whether you do your own blog or you write for somebody else or answer questions, I think this is why people start to vouch or pitch for you, especially this, because they'll read what you've written and see that it makes sense and you've got a consistent delivery of information or a kind of approach that just gives them the comfort level to say, okay, yep, this person understands what they're doing. And so, that ability to contribute is something you don't have to do a lot of it, but just enough that can give people comfort to say, yep, I believe in that person. So when it comes to contributions, I always talk about keep it short and practical and go light on the opinion. It's really in focus on when you talk about things, it's results over opinion. And you don't have to show and run a bunch of victory laps in your blog post or whatever, but just enough to show that you've performed the tasks appropriately. I find answering questions on LinkedIn is like an amazing spot because there are not many answers on questions, but there's lots of views. I would say for my own site, when I started Candidates Chair, I began answering questions on LinkedIn, and I'd say it would drive at times anywhere between 25 to 30% of the traffic would be people linking off my answers on LinkedIn going back to my site. So it's a real powerful source to kind of build your reputation. And again, you can refer back to your answers, and if you build on LinkedIn, if you answer enough, another spot where you can be considered, you get best answered, and you can show that to people that you've developed and you've gotten voted as delivering the best answer. And I think the key to getting the best answer, and then also in general, is just kind of stick to your knitting, stick to what you really know and what you can talk to well. It's, again, you want to go more on relevance to what you've done versus on what your opinion of how something might operate. And as John mentioned before, obviously LinkedIn is kind of the connection place where it's got that functionality, and when it comes to building your network, obviously the first place is LinkedIn invitations. And before I ever go out and make an invitation, I always think about, again, remind myself what's the purpose of that, and I'll get to that in a second why I want to know that. And then I always think about who are 2 to 3 people in my existing network, that person within my existing LinkedIn network, that this person that I'm reaching out to might be interested to meet. Because again, once I get started, I want to make sure that I can offer them something, someone that might be interesting for them to meet. If you can, always try and get an introduction before you send someone an invitation. So again, it's very similar to just your normal networking, that if someone can introduce you to that person, that's great. If you're going to network with someone and they've agreed to network with you, I always wait until after you've met that person before you send the invite. And again, because I think then you'll have a much higher rate of acceptance. And again, I think a LinkedIn invitation that doesn't get answered right away just kind of sits there over time, and so it would be, so you want to send it at a point when people are willing to respond. And so I usually, when I'm networking with someone, I'll close a meeting and say, would it be okay if I sent you a LinkedIn invitation, or do you want to connect on LinkedIn, or and I'll do it shortly after we meet, so it's fresh in mind. The most important 30 seconds for your LinkedIn invitations, I mean, always, and I really mean always, personalize the invite message. Again, you're competing with a lot of other activity that are out there that people are involved with, and and they may know you or may remember you, but again, you don't want to. It's so simple to just say, it was nice to meet you today, and so here's why I want to connect with you, and remind them of that purpose of why you're connecting with them, whatever it is. But quite frankly, for people that send me those LinkedIn, for me personally, if they send me a LinkedIn connection and don't take that time to offer why they want to connect with me, I just wonder whether or not they just want to connect or connect to really be a true networking connection. And so I think that it just says a lot. And then, only use friend or have done business when it's true. Anything else to me just starts off on the wrong foot. And if you don't have a referral when you go back above, this is where belonging to a group and belonging to a group with someone is a great place. Or if there's again someone else that's also on Proformative with you, you can take it from Proformative over to LinkedIn as well if you want. Staying connected. This obviously is very simple, but the importance of this slide is really once you've made the connections with somebody online, that's the one nice thing I find with people is that it's a really easy way to maintain your network or just keep it connected. And so what I've done is I have separated my own network into really different buckets and just figured out how the frequency that I want to connect with someone. So, on LinkedIn you can download your connections, and so I just put them in and kind of put a little letter next to them and then just sorted it out. And again, I'll just schedule time to go through and just reach out to people. And again, it doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to be anything major. But I think what I'm trying to get to is just think about what that value that person has to you in your network, and then just make sure that you are dedicating enough time. And again, I look at it that if there's somebody that you haven't talked to in a long time and you don't know why you're connecting with them, if you can't figure that out, you're probably better off just disconnecting with them, just because you don't want them to come back to you and ask you for a connection that you really don't want to make if you don't understand who they are. So as far as keeping it alive, that you want to get back to make sure that you're investing equally in building and maintaining. And I think you will find your natural limit, because in time you'll probably lean more towards after you start building, you will lean more towards maintaining than you will building, because it's hard to maintain a network of several hundred people. It just is impossible. Your success will come over time, so it's not going to be at that first meeting, the first time you connect. So you have to remember this is a long-term investment in yourself. So it's always that time you put into it will pay off in time. I think as long as you start, I always practice, and we covered this in the last seminar, what I call the 80% rule, that 80% of your networking should be focused on the other person, that you can give back to your network by providing them insight into the local market, just giving heads up on people that then of that are changing positions, areas where they just may not be in the loop or they just may not see it. Those are the types of things that you can give to your network that might be of interest. So it doesn't just have to be a, hey, I'm still here type of email. It can be, based on something like that. I like to go through my network and find ways to connect one another. I think one of the real things that makes you memorable is when you can offer a connection between people. And, I keep track of how many folks I've connected, and I've gone, I think I'm north of probably making over 500 connections between people in my network. And again, when you offer that value to them, it means a lot, and people remember that. And so again, trying to create a network where when you reach out to someone, that person is willing to say yes. Making connections for them is probably one of the most significant ways you can get them to say yes in the future. I actually book time on my calendar to network or to do my networking or follow-up. Otherwise, I just find my day gets away from me. The other way I like to do it in terms of keep going alive is I'll go to events where I know or I've got colleagues that are going to. It's an easy way just to meet and greet and have a little FaceTime with someone. And then lastly, I always try and be the first one to offer to go to coffee or say hello. And I find is that even if I haven't reached out to someone in a while, they're always happy to reconnect because, quite frankly, they've been just as busy to me and they haven't reached out to me. So by scheduling it and being kind of the first one to do it, it enhances that or enforces that being memorable and trying to continue to make sure it's a ongoing relationship. So with that, I will say thank you for your time, and I hope it was valuable today, and I'll turn it back over to John for the Q&A.
Oh, that's great. Mark, thank you. Actually, we have one more polling question, which I'm going to pop out there real quick. There it goes. So once again, for the CPE folks, please take this poll quickly, and then we'll get on to the question. We've got a couple questions queued up. If you have any other questions, folks in the audience, now's a good time to put them out there, and we'll be getting to ask these to Mark in just a moment. I'll also take a moment to remind you that there will be a brief survey that you will see when you step off this webinar or when we shut it down at the end. If you would just give us 60 seconds, we'd greatly appreciate your feedback. Also, we make it really easy there to connect with Mark. You can just check a box, and we'll help make that connection for you. Okay, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and now we'll get into our Q&A. First thing, why don't we, Mark, take a quick look at the results of the first polling question. And I'd love to have your comments here. Which job search method have you found to be most effective? You can see former professional relationships up at the top, and actually of the 4, not including other recruiting and job websites, are at the bottom. Is this kind of what you would expect to see? Or?
Yeah, actually that's about right. Because I think in general, I think the average is about 15 to 20% of jobs come through recruiters. So if you look at that polling results, it's about right. And recruiters, I always say, they're good people to connect with and get to know. But the real value, just make sure you connect with them. They have your stuff, and then that's really all you need to do. And then the rest comes through. It's your formal professional relationships, and I would say that I think is the most appropriate, just because, again, if you go back to the slide that we showed earlier, it really shows that these are the people that, because they can vouch for you, can speak for you, that their recommendations or weight carry so much value to you. And in fact, this is why I think, again, one of the benefits of on LinkedIn of being able to get recommendations It's a great thing to do for yourself, in particular for you in transition, because one of the big things, I mean, there still is always a little bit of a stigma if you're in transition, so I think being able to have these former colleagues vouch for you really overrides some of that concern that someone might have. And so, these, again, looking at that slide, I'm not shocked that that's where people found some of the most value.
Now, quick question, Mark. Looking at this slide, actually, it's very interesting. I'm glad you put this slide together. I think we all, in our heart of hearts, know that former colleagues or people who have a vested interest, maybe they're a personal connection that you've had for years, or a former classmate, what have you, that these people would be great to network with in a job search. And yet, I find people are very hesitant. They feel like they're imposing on these folks or bothering them in some way, shape, or form. How do you recommend people get comfortable with going after these first two levels here, the vested interest in the former colleagues? Because according to this slide, and I think it's just on the face of it very believable, these are the people who are probably going to be easiest and will be able to give you the most leverage.
When it comes to job search, I think it's always hard to ask for help. If there's a post I have out there, it's easy to find because it's the only one, but if you search for the liquor store joke, you'll find it on Proformative. But just so you can read that afterwards. But I think people struggle a little bit asking for help, but again, I think if you're just honest with people and you tell them what you're looking for, but even though I know these two layers very well, I still respect their time by being prepared and understanding. And while I don't have to prepare in the sense of them getting to know me and making my pitch, knowing what I want them to do for me and how how many times I go back to ask them for favors. Again, if I'm asking for a favor, I'm always making sure that I'm offering a favor at the same time. So I even though I can rely on them, I try and make sure there is some mutual benefit back and forth. But to start with, I think it just really gets down to, John, just being open and honest with somebody, just sitting down with them face-to-face or having a call with them and talking to them and just reconnecting and then just telling them kind of where you're at and what you're looking for, in particular for a job search. And I think what you'll find is that once you tell people and you just tell them what you're looking for, it'll just go from there. I mean, because they do know you well enough, again, most people are willing to help if you've got a good relationship with them.
That's also what I have found. I think there's maybe a high wall to get over to get comfortable with reaching out to these folks. But once you do, they're really happy to hear from you, and boy, they really want to help you out. So that's a great point to make. I'm glad you put this slide out there. Another question coming in from Robert. I've had many networking meetings, but in quite a few, people want to send an unsolicited resume on my behalf to a third party, effectively a third-party cold call. What techniques would you suggest to convert these people to better networking practices? In other words, don't just take my resume and kind of spam it forward for me. I mean, I guess maybe that says something, but not much. How can you further energize these folks to get greater benefit?
I think in the last, one of the things that I wish we had the last deck up, John, is we have that I have and then there's a post on Proformative called the Roadmap to the Hiring Manager. And the key for when you meet with people in networking, and that it's very gracious of that person to offer to send it forward first, so that's great. But what you want to do is make sure they are sending it to A, the right person that you want, and then B, with the right message. And so when I found people that have said, well, I'll just pass it on, if they're just passing it on, I'm not sure what that other person on the other end is going to do. So I always try to figure out when they say, well, I'll be willing to pass it on, I'll find out who are they passing it on to and what kind of relationship do they have with that person, because it's really the strength of the relationship of your networking contact to the person that they want to pass it on to. If it's just some people that they know mildly, when they pass it on, it's probably not going to get a lot of views. If they know them well, obviously that person on the receiving end is going to look for it. So try to understand that, because the less they know the person, the more you need to prep them with the message. So for example, I've had people that are willing to pass it on, and I'll tell them, look, why don't I do this for you? Why don't I provide you, effectively a 2 or 3 sentence lead in or an overview of how, what you'd like what I'd like you to try and say to them. And I would say 95% of the time people say, no, that'd be great. If you would send that to me, I'll just forward it on or write an email. I'm happy to forward it on with a little note. And that, I think, is probably the best way that I've turned someone that's willing to send it on to me to making sure it's effective. Understand kind of the relationship, and then the less it is, help them pitch it.
Yeah, I find that help them pitch it part really makes life easy, because people, even if they want to forward you on, they ask themselves, oh, what am I going to write? Boy, a concise background of Mark Richards, I'm not certain I can write that. If you write it for them and hand it to them, then now all they have to do is think of, who am I going to forward this to? They don't have to spend nearly as much time on the content. So,
right, and I think it's when you go back to the last, if you go back and watch the last webinar, one of the key messages that we talk about is help them help you, and that is as much as you can do to make networking with you easy, and that's part of it, is just offering to make those, take that extra step to write for them and not relying upon them to look at your resume and figure out how to pitch you, but you pitching yourself through them.
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions here actually about LinkedIn, and I have a few questions about deconnecting from people, cleaning up your network on LinkedIn. What are your recommendations for cleaning up your network? Should you bother or not bother, or does it having too many connections maybe defocus you from the connections that actually are meaningful?
I would say that I generally go through once every 6 months, and I look at it and see whether or not I've actually connected with that person. And I kind of put it in 2 categories. Do I, is it somebody that I want to continue to connect with, so therefore I'll try and re-engage them again? Or is it someone that, when I thought I first connected with them, you always think about what the potential is, but it just isn't either panned out that way, or, it's been hard to keep them engaged. So at that point, I just disconnect. And when you disconnect, people don't know. I mean, they just, LinkedIn doesn't send them like a big flashing red flag that says, hey, you got disconnected, so you don't have to worry. It's kind of a silent disconnect. And so, but again, the risk of having people out there that you haven't done anything with is when they come back and ask you for something, or, they have access to your, all your connections, right? I mean, and they can look at it, and if they go to that person and say, hey, I'm connected with, if there's someone, and this has happened to me, where someone came and said, hey, I'm connected with Mark, and I thought I'd reach out to you, and then the person comes back to me and said, why is this person trying to connect with me? Or, so it's been you just want to make sure that, again, you're protecting your network or managing your network. That's why I would disconnect.
Interesting. Okay. Now, I think we've all seen people who have, the famous 500-plus connections on LinkedIn, which is that LinkedIn, I think, doesn't display exactly how many once you go above 500. And it seems like a lot of people are sort of on the hunt to just get to that place for some reason. What's your thoughts about the whole quantity versus quality on LinkedIn?
Again, easy to get a lot of quantity. I mean, you see those people that are what they call lions. LinkedIn open networkers. And again, it's a big network is a little bit of a false positive. It looks good, but if you don't really do anything with it, there's not a lot of value. So on the slide that I put where I talked about exposure and connections, it's really only those people that you're active with are going to be willing to do something with you. And, those are the people that'll, kind of help your exposure, promote your exposure, because again, one of the things, especially like if you take LinkedIn to Twitter, right? What I find is that there are people that if I publish a tweet on LinkedIn, many of my LinkedIn connections that I'm relatively active with will then, tweet it on their account or whatever. So those are they'll be willing to kind of promote it or share that type of information for you. So again, providing that exposure to help building your reputation and brand. So again, I think easy to build. I don't necessarily know it really impresses anybody that if you've got a giant network. I think what impresses somebody is when they reach out to you and say, can I get some help with a connection here, and you're able to deliver. That's what impresses people.
Mm-hmm. Another question, moving on here. I have used InMail to ask the question or send a personalized invite for coffee or lunch, but didn't get any response. What's wrong with this picture? And I've actually expanded that, whether it was InMail or whether it's someone who's already a connection of yours. When you reach out via LinkedIn and you don't get a response, what, if anything, should you take away from that? Or what could you do about it?
Well, first, it starts with what the message is that you sent them, and you make sure you're being very clear. There is on Proformative, you'll find there is an email template for writing a good invite via email for networking, to ask for a networking meeting, that I developed over time, and this is a total trial and error thing, but once I got to the format, I can just tell you I got about a 90% response rate. So make sure that the message that you're giving, whether it's through InMail or just regular email, is very to the point in terms of why you're meeting, what you would like them to do. So again, there's the template for you to look at. But then second, I mean, you never know what that's happening on the person's end when you email them, right? So you might have gotten to them when they're in the middle of a big system upgrade. And so it's very similar to the emails that John is sending to me now, because I'm going through a system upgrade at our company, so I'm not very responsive. But my rule is I usually reach out 3 times, and so you give them the benefit of doubt and you just follow up. So if they don't respond the first time, don't take anything away from it, other than that perhaps they're just busy. So just try it again. Again, I always just try 3. My rule of thumb is, professionally 3 times, spread them out about 2 weeks apart, and then, if they don't respond, fair enough.
And actually, Mark, if you don't mind, I'd like to share something really quick with folks before we bail here, which is if you look on the Proformative site and you do a search for Mark Richards, Mark has been very generous in contributing content to the site. If you do a search for Mark, you will actually see these high-level results that I'm pointing to here. And Mark, not only does he have 59 blogs, and 18 questions, but 40 resources. If you click on these resources, a number of the things that Mark has been talking about are right here. They're what we call resources. So here's the daily point system for a networking organization, courtesy of Mark Richards. And you can pop here and download these things, and or watch them if they happen to be recorded webinars, etc. And it's just wonderfully high-quality information that Mark has put together. Mark is one of us, longtime finance professional and executive. He really gets it. And there's just a wealth of information here. And also, of course, you can go back and see what Mark has written when it comes to those blogs and what he's done with the questions, et cetera. It's great stuff. So with that, we're coming to the end of our time here. Mark, I'd really like to just thank you for your wonderful information. As always, great to have you on board here today, so thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks, John. It was fun.
All right. Last piece of business here. Let me go ahead and toss this slide out. You'll have a quick survey, which you'll get as soon as we close down the webinar. Once again, if you have any CPE questions, here is Tanya Walsh's email down at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to reach out to her, and she'll help you out. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone for your time and attention today. Everyone's crazy busy all the time these days, so it's great to give us an hour of your time. We hope to see you again online at Proformative or at one of our future events. And with that, I will go ahead and end the webinar, and in a moment you'll be presented with that survey. Thank you so much.